And it was like when I first started, we started playing jazz blues, kind of like John Mayall's Blues Breakers, and you know, I used to like B.B. King's guitar playing and whatnot, Eric Clapton and Cream and things like that.
If you're seriously into heavy rock music, or even if your interest in the form is casual at best, there's no getting away from the importance of Black Sabbath in the early to mid-1970s. No other band has come closer to embodying the true spirit of metal than this legendary four-man powerhouse. They pioneered a bone-crunching rock and roll assault that laid the foundations for the heavy metal revolution that would sweep popular music in the late 1970s, 1980s and 1990s. But it wasn't this definitive British metal band that invented the genre. This type of music had been coalescing long before Black Sabbath arrived on the scene. The likes of Jimi Hendrix, the Rolling Stones, The Who and the Kinks had all made contributions to the fledgling musical form. But if you ask any discerning rock fan, there's no question that Black Sabbath, along with Premier League hard rock heavyweights Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, did as much as anyone to popularise classic metal and provide some of its most important and essential recordings. Critics detested them when they were at the peak of their powers in the early 1970s, and do so even today. But critical acclaim was never essential to the band's success. Black Sabbath was, in many ways, an underground band, one of the first alternative rock acts of sorts. Parents hated them, hippies hated them, and even self-respecting rockers hated them. Everybody had something against them except teenagers. And those were the teenagers that would later grow up and form many of today's top metal bands, from Metallica to White Zombie, from Soundgarden to Henry Rollins, from Type O Negative to Coal Chamber. Everybody from the heaviest of metal bands to the sludgiest of grunge bands listened to Black Sabbath and claimed them as their chief musical influence. Mixing equal parts of ear-splitting volume, catatonic tempos, and ominous pronouncements of gloom and doom delivered in Ozzy Osbourne's keening, booming voice, Black Sabbath were the heavy metal kings of the 70s. The band's blistering ensemble playing and evocative lyrical blend of machismo and mysticism set the standard that others could only follow in awe. The Black Sabbath story proper began back in the post-war years of 1948 and 1949, when four individuals by the names of Anthony Frank Iommi, William Ward, John Michael Osborne and Terence Michael Joseph Butler all arrived on the face of our planet rock. In 1967, these four young schoolmates from Aston, a working-class Birmingham neighbourhood, first joined forces in a band by the name of Polka Tulk, playing a high-energy blend of blues and rock. Comprising of Ozzy Osbourne on vocals, Tony Iommi on guitar, bassist Terry Geezer Butler and Bill Ward on drums, the quartet set about the arduous task of defining what would become their own unique sound. In 1968, the Polka Tulk Blues Band changed their name to Earth. Playing a jazz blues fusion, Earth took their local hometown pub and club circuit by storm, gaining a fervent following throughout the English Midlands. They then toured exhaustively in the UK, and by the end of the year had clocked up ceaseless late-night miles throughout the rest of Europe, not least breaking the Beatles' long-held house attendance record at the Star Club in Hamburg, West Germany. In January 1969, Earth, along with members from local groups Bakerloo, of which Spencer Davis Group's Pete York was a member, Tea and Symphony and Locomotive, made their industry debut at Birmingham's opposite Lock Tavern under the banner of The Big Bear Folly, a touring musical caravan that also made its first London appearance at the legendary Marquee Club in Wardour Street that February. Prompted by their then manager Jim Simpson, Earth made the fateful decision to switch its name to Black Sabbath in early 1969 and also adopted a suitably matching macabre image. The new moniker Black Sabbath reflected the band's newfound penchant for playing moody, dark-hued heavy metal that matched supernatural themes with supercharged ensemble playing and hinted at the heavy, doom-laden and ingenious records they were to produce. The name had previously been used as a song title by the quartet in their pre-Earth blues band Polka Tulk, and it was drawn not from a book by the occult writer Dennis Wheatley, as is often stated, but from the cult horror film of that title. Nevertheless, Many of Sabbath's songs would later deal with alternative beliefs and practices touched upon in Wheatley's novels, prompted by bassist Geezer Butler's abiding interest in the popular black magic novelist. The radical reworking of their jazz blues style and sharp change of name luckily caught the first wave of British heavy metal. It was certainly a case of black magic when, after a year's constant touring, during which they continued to build a huge live following, the group signed to Philips Records subsidiary Fontana UK. In December 1969, Black Sabbath entered the recording studio to cut their debut album.
It's a kind of a blues, and all that Sabbath did really was develop a form of that into what we got to like then, you know.
January 1970 saw the release of the group's debut single, Evil Woman, Don't Play Your Games With Me, a cover of a 1969 US Top 20 hit by Minneapolis-based rock quintet Crow. However, the song failed to make any headway in the British music charts. Despite this minor setback, the fledgling Black Sabbath had become something of a respected live attraction. On March 29th, they took part in a mini Woodstock-style event, a CND benefit concert in London's Victoria Park, with Toe Fat, Liverpool Scene, JJ Jackson's Dilemma and DJ John Peel, on the eve of their release of their debut album that April. The single, Evil Woman, was reissued, again without any chart success, on Philips's new progressive rock label Vertigo, alongside the quartet's eponymously self-titled debut LP, Black Sabbath, which had been recorded in just 2 days on a budget of £600 with producer Roger Bain. A black metal beast, overflowing with occult imagery, it gave birth to a new era of rock and roll. Classic tracks such as Black Sabbath, The Wizard and NIB would pave the way for countless metal bands who would sing about witches, demons, goblins, vampires, sorcerers and the occult. Besides hitting the top 10 on the British charts, where it remained for over 3 months, the album also earned the band a devoted cult following on the other side of the Atlantic. Black Sabbath were hot property. A performance at the Hollywood Music Festival near Newcastle-under-Lyme, Staffordshire, that May further solidified their growing status. However, the major breakthrough for Black Sabbath came in October 1970 with the release of their second album, Paranoid. A pioneering heavy metal offering, it featured many of their early stage favourites, including War Pigs, their most memorable stab at politics, which painted unspecified warmongers in an evil light. It topped the UK charts for the first of 2 weeks, while the album's title track, a harrowing descent into madness if there ever was one, also simultaneously hit number 4 in the UK singles chart. Paranoid, the group's only ever top 20 hit single in the UK, would prove, as the years progressed, to be the band's trademark swan song. Little did Sabbath know it at the time, but both would eventually become their most enduring records, regarded as classics in the evolution of heavy metal music. Laden with Tony Iommi's driving guitar riffs, Ozzy Osbourne's sinister, eerie vocals, and the thundering rhythm section of Geezer Butler and Bill Ward, the chart-topping album's sombre tone and the Sab's dark showbiz trappings also forged the band's supposed reputation as Satanists. In spite of their name, the crosses erected on stage, and songs dealing with apocalypse, death and destruction, the band members insisted that their interest in the black arts was nothing more than an innocuous curiosity, and in time, Black Sabbath's Princes of Darkness image would fade. Following the band's first successful American college tour in the fall of 1970, the album Black Sabbath was released in the US on the Warner Brothers label that December. It climbed to number 23 in the US charts, where it would remain charted for more than a year, eventually reaching platinum sales status, while the track Paranoid reached US number 61. Serving up a potent metallic cocktail with other key tracks such as Iron Man and Fairies Wear Boots, the Paranoid album certainly saw the Sabs at the peak of their powers, and they were to remain there with a great trio of early 70s albums. Paranoid remains one of the most innovative and influential long players in rock history. The cynics might have depicted Black Sabbath as a bunch of dummies who had struck lucky, but this was music that made sense after 3 seconds of listening, appealed to the expanding FM rock radio market, and sent long-haired kids into guitar shops by the million.
You couldn't hardly have had, with the name Black Sabbath, a boy and a girl kissing on the front album instead of, I'm surprised, you know.
While the Paranoid single may not have made the glorious heights of the US Top 40, by March 1971, the Paranoid album had reached the number 12 spot in the US album charts during a 65-week chart tenure, and it would later go on to sell over 4 million copies, despite virtually no airplay. With their US and UK popularity cemented in solid rock, the band's rock and roll exploits ultimately became synonymous with the cliched hard rock lifestyle, a toxic mixture of drink, drugs, groupies, and totally exhausting tour schedules. Black Sabbath's third long-playing, riff-amongus metallic romp, Master of Reality, which further extended the group's twisted, macabre lyrical themes, was released in late August 1971, hitting the top 10 spot, UK number 5 and US number 8, on both sides of the Atlantic. Like its illustrious predecessors, it served up yet more Sabbath trademark classics, in the shape of Sweet Leaf and Children of the Grave among the album's 8 original selections. In March 1972, Iron Man, belatedly taken from the band's mega Paranoid album, charted at number 52 in the US, while the band were in the studio recording yet another album. Released in October, the band's fourth opus, the aptly titled Black Sabbath Volume 4, hit UK number 8 and US number 13 respectively. Recorded at the record plant in Los Angeles, Volume 4 was little short of brilliant, combining matchless metal with some intertwining instrumental passages. In addition to such blinding powerhouse originals as Supernaut and Under the Sun, the album revealed a whole new side to the band's songwriting skills, with such melodic and carefully crafted selections as Cornucopia and the haunting Laguna Sunrise, the latter an instrumental that would subsequently become one of the band's musical trademarks. On the cuff, the heartfelt ballad Changes showcased Ozzy Osbourne's vocal prowess in a chilling number that still retained an element of hard rock power. Keeping the pop punters happy, they released Tomorrow's Dream from the album, their first UK single since Paranoid. In a period of 2 years, Black Sabbath had earned themselves international rock stardom. The four Brummies had also chalked up a host of heavy metal classics destined to stand the test of time. What did the Sabs have that made them the ultimate metallic masters? Black Sabbath's slow, sludgy attack was part design and part accident. Because of an accident that had cut off the tips of his fingers, Tony Iommi had tuned his guitar down a half step because he couldn't play comfortably unless the strings were slightly slackened. The lower tuning made his mammoth riffs sound even heavier. The Axemen's crunching riffs reworked basic blues at mind-numbing volume. Sabbath also added some entirely new twists and turns to their music. Instead of focusing purely on the virtuoso displays and the high-concept songwriting that so many of their contemporaries were peddling, the quartet had stripped their sound down to a throbbing, primordial ooze balanced by frontman Ozzy Osbourne's deep affection for pop hooks. Their songwriting never strayed from one riff, a chorus, another riff, and a guitar solo, but that was part of their appeal. Taken together, the primitive musicianship, bad poetry, obsessive fantasy themes, crawling tempos, and overpowering mind-numbing volume simultaneously represented everything good and everything bad about heavy metal. Bassist Geezer Butler and drummer Bill Ward never had any flair for playing around with the rhythm, preferring to let the beat plod on and on. They preferred to hold a solid backing track that left space for Ozzy's vocals to approach near hysteria, Indeed, when Sabbath were in their prime, a key element of their sound was their lead singer, whose sinister-sounding vocals were perfect for such dark tales of evil. Butler's lyrics revelled in black magic, fantasy, drugs, mental illness, and the occult, but never sex, and vocalist Osbourne sang them in a flat, almost tuneless, banshee wail.
You could get 4 rabbis up there and call them Black Sabbath and it would pull a crowd because of their name.
As the band changed management, replacing their original manager Jim Simpson, to his displeasure, with Patrick Meehan, the classic Black Sabbath lineup of Ozzy Osbourne, Tony Iommi, Bill Ward and Geezer Butler changed its shape. Yes, keyboard wizard Rick Wakeman was brought in to play on the band's 5th studio album, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, which saw the light of day at the tail end of 1973. One of a handful of hard rock's certified classics, Black Sabbath's 1973 tour de force, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, provided them with yet another metallic masterpiece, earning critical acclaim to match the group's long-standing stature as premier heavy metal practitioners. Such standards as Killing Yourself to Live, Sabba Cadabra, Looking for Today, and the epic title track combined the group's propulsive musical drive with a multifaceted lyric approach that was, by turns, subtle and commanding. Produced, written and performed by the group, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath remains a high point in the band's long recording career. By January 1974, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath had made its mark on the charts on both sides of the Atlantic, making UK number 4 and US number 11 respectively. They continued to tour the States relentlessly. The constant road work had obviously paid off, because by the end of 1974 they were considered peerless amongst heavy metal acts, their first 5 LPs all having sold at least 1 million copies apiece in America alone. However, life on the road was beginning to take its toll on certain band members. By this time, singer Ozzy Osbourne had begun to isolate himself from the others because of his even harder drinking lifestyle and an unwillingness to move away from Sabbath's established heavy metal musical formula. Continued success also resulted in further managerial problems for the band. Having only recently hired a new manager in the shape of Patrick Meehan, Sabbath decided to replace him with their booking agent Don Arden. Meantime, their first manager, the disgruntled Jim Simpson, was in the lengthy process of taking legal action against the band over what he considered to be an unfairly broken contract with the group. To make matters worse, Osbourne was handed a subpoena as he walked on stage at a US tour date, precipitating an almost 2-year enforced hiatus for Black Sabbath, as legal battles over management raged.
It was time to go. It was like we were all going. They were frustrated with me, and I was frustrated with them. We weren't going anywhere musically. We weren't doing. There was no challenge there because we knew as the name Black Sabbath, we could go out and pull a crowd anywhere and make a living. We could tick over.
In the summer of 1975, Black Sabbath made their live debut at New York's Madison Square Garden. By September of that year, with legal matters finally resolved, and their UK contract and back catalogue shifted to NEMS Records, the group returned to British shores with a major UK tour in support of their 6th long player, Sabotage. This charted at number 7 in the UK and eventually number 28 in the US. Sabotage not only clinched the quartet's reputation as premier hard rockers, but also earned them lavish praise for their arranging, producing and songwriting skills. With a potent blend of high-energy rock and haunting, evocative lyrics, the 8 classic cuts comprising Sabotage showcased Black Sabbath at the peak of their formidable musical power. Standout rockers such as Hole in the Sky, Symptom of the Universe and Am I Going Insane had all the hallmarks of the classic Sabbath sound, but also showed progression. January 1976 saw the release of a blockbuster Best Of double compilation collection featuring 14 of Black Sabbath's hard rock and heavy metal classics. Entitled We Sold Our Soul for Rock and Roll, it chronicled the pioneering group's groundbreaking career to date, from their inception through to the release of 1975's critically acclaimed Sabotage album. Included on this deluxe package were such slabs of pure Sabbath mayhem as Paranoid, War Pigs, Fairies Wear Boots, and Children of the Grave. Needless to say, it charted at respectable top 40 positions in both the UK and US. The release of the compilation sadly marked the end of what would become known as the classic early Sabbath era. Black Sabbath's early vinyl efforts had been simple triumphs of minimalism, reducing rock to its most elemental appeal. Each individual release had been as fun as it had been twisted, and as creatively imaginative as it had been blatantly bombastic. Instead of trying to get inside the narcotic experience, Sabbath had simply celebrated taking drugs. Rather than tapping into cosmology and Middle-earth, they had shamelessly borrowed horror movie imagery, and oblivious to more bourgeois concerns such as ennui and angst, they had driven right into alienation and escapism. From 1976 onwards, however, the band, dogged by peer pressure to sound different, would become the victims of their own success, not to mention bad luck. In late October 1976, Technical Ecstasy, which returned the band to the Vertigo label, appeared after troubled recording sessions, during which guitarist Tony Iommi wanted to experiment with more complex arrangements, overdubs, and even the use of a horn section, all against Osbourne's wishes. Although the album went top 20 in the UK, over in America, where they had previously lapped up every Black Sabbath release with open arms, it failed to make an impact, staying just outside the US top 50. Yet, despite this wane in commercial popularity stateside, to many fans, Technical Ecstasy still stands as one of the band's most inventive and original studio outings, containing such propulsive studies in Sabbathology as Backstreet Kids, Gypsy, Rock and Roll Doctor, and the LP's centrepiece, Dirty Women. By 1977, personal difficulties within the band were beginning to take their toll. To many die-hard Sabbath devotees, the music had lost some of its earlier bombastic sheen, a result perhaps of a touch too much heroin and hard spirits. Ozzy Osbourne, racked by drug use and very excessive drinking, finally decided to briefly quit the ranks after more internal friction in November of that year. He was replaced for some live dates by former Savoy Brown Fleetwood Mac vocalist Dave Walker, probably the least successful in a string of hopeful singers who would later attempt the near impossible task of replacing Ozzy. Mad as it seemed, in January 1978, despite continuing strained relations between Ozzy and the rest of the band, the frontman decided to rejoin the Sabbath fold and give it another try. However, relations between him and the rest of the band would never be the same again. The damage had been done. Despite this, the Sabs embarked on a late spring, early summer British tour with a little-known band by the name of Van Halen in support. The live dates paid off. In June, the band had a surprise UK top 30 hit single on their hands in the shape of Never Say Die, the title track from their forthcoming record. It was their first major British hit since Paranoid had rocked up the charts in 1970. The highly anticipated Never Say Die, Black Sabbath's 8th studio outing, was released in October 1978. Recorded at Sounds Interchange in Toronto, Canada, it again featured the potent combination of Tony Iommi's electrifying guitar, the vocals of premier rock performer Ozzy Osbourne, and some of the band's most memorable songwriting. Standout cuts included Johnny Blade, Breakout, Shockwave, and the enigmatic title track, which were all to be included in the group's live repertoire. Sadly, Never Say Die, which captured all the legendary power of the original Sabbath lineup, would be the last album to feature Ozzy as the Sabs frontman. The rot had set in. Record sales for new Sabbath material were starting to flag. In the first half of the 1970s, every Black Sabbath album had approached classic metal status. With the mighty Warner Corporation behind them, the band had stormed the US. Aside from the 1976's platinum-selling best of We Sold Our Soul for Rock and Roll, not one of the band's 3 LPs from 1975 to 1978 went gold. Like its predecessor Technical Ecstasy, Never Say Die performed well in the UK album charts, again giving the Sabs another top 20 album, but failed to light up the American record market, only hitting number 69 in the Billboard charts. It also provided another UK hit single in the shape of Hard Rain, which climbed to number 33. Commercial misgivings aside, it didn't erase the fact that Sabbath with Ozzy still provided some of metal's finest recordings.
The thing was, I honestly I still believe they should stop that name now, because it's like dragging the dead horse even further. But I don't think they will. To be honest, I don't think they've got the nerve to, because it does take a lot of guts to say, right, we're going to have a go on our own. It really, I mean, that was one of the biggest fears that I had. I thought, am I going to succeed on my own?
In terms of band chemistry, Black Sabbath were beginning to lose the plot. Even before Osbourne's final departure, the band had begun to decline, album by album. The group's increasing lack of focus had resulted in odd experiments that almost aspired to prog rock complexity, but ended up sounding like meandering preludes to Supertramp and Boston Records. The musicianship was as driving as ever, but the originality that had given rise to all the inky, brooding, compelling sounds during Osbourne's tenure was almost gone. From the mid-1970s, much of Sabbath's career had been beset by management and contractual problems, and by the all-too-predictable musical differences scenario. While guitarist Tony Iommi had wanted to experiment, singer Ozzy Osbourne wanted to party and stick with tried and tested formats. Bassist Geezer was largely behind Iommi, while drummer Bill Ward could knock back as many drinks as Ozzy. The tension could, on occasion, produce some great music, but from 1975's Sabotage onwards, the music often had a self-conscious quality that undermined its strength. For nearly 10 years, Black Sabbath had reigned over the hard rock scene, but despite respectable business around the world, the brooding internal conflict between Osbourne and the rest of the band remained unresolved. The singer's relationship with Sabbath was stale and had overreached its original sell-by date. That aside, Ozzy had simply lost interest in what Sabbath was doing musically. In January 1979, the singer made the decision to leave the group permanently, to form his own band, Blizzard of Oz, and ultimately embark on a successful and influential career as a solo artist. Black Sabbath would never be the same again. It was hard to imagine the influential heavy metal band continuing without him. Since their inception in the late 1960s, Ozzy Osbourne's lead vocals had been a key part of Sabbath's sound. Osbourne's keening voice and deadpan earnestness had imparted their songs with a distinctive kind of anti-charisma that he took with him, along with the persistent pop fixation that lurked behind some of Sabbath's greatest numbers. Although despised by rock critics and ignored by radio programmers, the group had now sold over 8 million albums worldwide. In March 1979, Sabbath attempted to shed their business and legal problems by signing a new management deal with Don Arden. At the same time, they managed to find a suitable replacement for Osbourne in Ronnie James Dio, an American who had been a central figure in the early 70s, fronting his own band, Elf. He had also served a 3-year stint with former Deep Purple guitarist Ritchie Blackmore in Rainbow. Dio was the perfect choice, a gem of a lead singer who could belt out a line with the best of them. He had already made his mark, gracing such metallic classics as Man on the Silver Mountain, Stargazer, and Kill the King. It was Sabbath's first major personnel change in over a decade.
Bill was on this, he was a recovering alcoholic, and when we were at the Manor recording and stuff like that, after we'd done while we were doing the album, Bill started drinking again, and basically I think he found he couldn't find the same sort of thing as he got, the relief as he got in America, where he had there's a lot of places there that deal with alcoholism, and I don't think he could find all the proper facilities here.
What many people refuse to recognise is that the music of Black Sabbath lived on well after Ozzy Osbourne left the band. Ironically, it took Osbourne's departure and the arrival of Ronnie James Dio in the vocal department to provide the band with the major creative shot in the arm they so desperately needed. The new look Sabbath was unveiled during a UK tour in May 1980 in support of the album Heaven and Hell that included a 4-night stint at London's Hammersmith Odeon. It was clear for all to see that there was indeed life after Oz for the band. Almost in the same class as the band's early 70s efforts, Black Sabbath's 9th studio outing, Heaven and Hell, easily made the UK top 10. Introducing Dio's mythology-influenced lyrics, it was a major improvement over 1978's Never Say Die opus, Osbourne's final album with the band. The switch from Osbourne to Dio had had quite an effect on Sabbath's sound. Since Dio had a definite sense of his own identity, he was every bit as distinctive as Ozzy and thus avoided copying him. However, some listeners argued that Sabbath didn't really sound like Sabbath anymore, they sounded more like Rainbow. Be that as it may, Ronnie James Dio's work with Sabbath made for some very rewarding classic heavy metal. Among the record's 8 original cuts, co-written by Dio and the band, Children of the Sea and Heaven and Hell's title song are musical gems that the singer would continue to embrace long after departing the lineup. The album's lead cut, Neon Nights, another true heavy metal classic, provided Black Sabbath with their 3rd consecutive top 30 hit single in the UK, while its parent record, Heaven and Hell, broke the band's recent rot in the US by reaching number 28. To cash in on the band's commercial comeback, Black Sabbath Live at Last, a previously unheard on-stage recording made in 1975 by the original Sabbath lineup, was released by NEMS Records in the summer of 1980. Disowned by the current band, it nevertheless made the top 5 in the UK album charts. Encouraged by its popularity, NEMS then reissued the Paranoid single, which recharted in the UK at number 54 that September, almost 10 years after its original release. It also topped the UK independent chart rundown, sitting oddly among the batch of current new wave records. In November 1980, Sabbath lost another of its key original founding members when drummer Bill Ward left the band. His sad departure forced by recurring bad health, brought on by years of drinking. Ex-Axis drummer Vinny Appice, younger brother of Vanilla Fudge skinsman Carmine Appice, replaced him on drums for a major American tour. Still, 1980 hadn't been a bad year for the Sabs. Heaven and Hell was a platinum seller, and another single, Die Young, made the UK top 50.
We're going to do exactly what we've done at the early type of stuff. It's just coming out as
stuff that we like now. If it's something that we write and everybody likes it, and that's what we're pleased with. That's what we'll be doing.
After the band's hallmark comeback, Heaven and Hell opus, Black Sabbath recorded one more studio album with Ronnie James Dio as their frontman. Released in November 1981, the excellent Mob Rules also featured the talents of the group's new drummer, Vinny Appice. Mob Rules consisted of 9 smashing metallic cuts, including Voodoo, Slipping Away, the epic Sign of the Southern Cross, and the record's guitar-crunching title track that was featured in the film Heavy Metal. A gold seller, Heaven and Hell consolidated Sabbath's newfound commercial gain, going top 20 and top 30 in the UK and US charts, while the extracted title cut, Mob Rules, made number 46 in the UK singles chart. Major British and American tours followed its release. However, Sabbath experienced yet more internal bickering as Iommi began to voice his growing resentment of Dio's influence on their music. In early 1982, Sabbath chalked up another top 40 hit in the States with the Dio-esque epic Turn Up the Night. In May that year, the group was awarded the gold ticket for playing to over 100,000 fans at New York's Madison Square Gardens. However, Dio's tenure with the band was to be a short one. In the studio, the band were managing solid, if predictable, classic heavy metal, but this came at a high price, and no one was surprised when the acrimony boiled over. Friction between Iommi and Dio led the singer to quit amongst angry scenes in November 1982. This followed a major disagreement when the Sab's guitar man accused him of tampering with the mix of the band's forthcoming live album, Live Evil, in order to highlight his vocals. The singer had only been with Sabbath for a mere 3 years. He took drummer Vinny Appice with him to form his own successful metal act, Dio. January 1983 saw the release of the much-troubled double live album, Live Evil, the first official Black Sabbath live offering. Recorded on the road in Dallas, San Antonio, in Texas and Seattle, it again consolidated the band's international position, reaching the UK Top 20 and US Top 40. Sadly, with the departure of Dio and Appice, Sabbath lacked coherence and seemed destined to fold for good. That said, Live Evil did contain a host of great Sabbath songs, from their first album up to the band's last studio album release, Mob Rules. Ironically, at around the same time, former singer Ozzy Osbourne released his own set of classic Sabbath songs entitled Talk of the Devil, recorded live with his own band. Needless to say, the fans bought both records.
But as far as with Ian, I don't know what happened there. We got on stage and he just thought it was different altogether. He couldn't sing the vocals or anything.
Band personnel problems were solved in the summer of 1983 when Ian Gillan, former vocalist with Deep Purple, and his own band, Gillan, was persuaded, allegedly after too many drinks in the pub, to join Black Sabbath. To solidify the lineup further, original drummer Bill Ward was brought back into the group. However, when Sabbath headlined the Reading Rock Festival in late August with its new lineup, fellow Brummie rocker Bev Bevan, of ELO fame, had to be drafted in to play drums when the ailing Ward was forced by illness to withdraw once again. Bevan then remained with the band in a touring capacity. In October 1983, the new lineup, with Ward again back on drums for studio commitments, released their comeback album Born Again, recorded at the Manor Studios, Shipton-on-Cherwell, Oxfordshire. Its illustrious musical pedigree earned it a top 5 spot in the UK album charts, while in America a top 40 position was assured. But while Born Again managed to make most of the right heavy metal sounds, it lacked the classic metal songs to suggest that this lineup had a chance. The likes of Trashed, Digital Bitch and Zero the Hero, although fueled by some great riffs from Iommi, didn't really stand up to the material that Sabbath had previously recorded with both Ozzy Osbourne and Ronnie James Dio. In fact, to many fans, this particular Sabbath incarnation is generally regarded as the most disastrous, with Born Again failing to capture any of the original vitality of the group. While Ian Gillan had the vocal ability to lead the band, his stint out front marked the nearest any real metal band ever came to being Spinal Tap. Things got seriously strange on a US tour. The Stonehenge set was worrying enough, and Gillan's sketchy grasp of Sabbath lyrics was seriously exposed as swirling dry ice blocked his view of his cue cards. Classic metal songs were reduced to endless riffs and screams of "yeah." Tragedy and comedy were seldom so close together. The band was then hit by the major bombshell in March 1984 when the only recently recruited Ian Gillan left to join the reforming classic Deep Purple Mark II lineup. With Bill Ward just about still in the ranks, in a studio capacity anyway, the band tried out with an unknown American vocalist by the name of David Donato. The lineup never even made it into a recording studio. Donato was later fired from the group over a very egotistical magazine interview he gave. They tried once more, and the only other person alleged to be in the band during this time was Ron Keel. Matters finally came to a head when longtime bassist Geezer Butler knocked a further nail in the disintegrating Sabbath coffin by opting to leave. The remaining members of Black Sabbath needed to recharge their collective batteries, so they temporarily decided to split up. Despite ongoing bitterness expressed in the press between Ozzy Osbourne and Tony Iommi, the original classic Black Sabbath lineup of Osbourne, Iommi, Ward and Butler reunited strictly as a one-off to play at the Live Aid benefit concert at JFK Stadium, Philadelphia, on July 13, 1985. It was a memorable mini-live performance that featured a poundingly heavy Paranoid. By 1986, proceedings in the Sabbath camp had reached an all-time low, with guitarist Tony Iommi being the only original member left to steer the band forward. Stubbornly refusing to put Sabbath to rest, Iommi recruited several prominent metal faces. Most notably, former Trapeze Deep Purple vocalist Glenn Hughes. The other newly recruited musicians were Jeff Nichols, who had been the group's background keyboard player since 1980 while still a member of Quartz, bassist Dave Spitz, and ex-Lita Ford drummer Eric Singer, who would later go on to make his mark with glam rockers Kiss. This was a highly accomplished lineup, but it wasn't Black Sabbath. In March 1986, the unexpectedly bluesy-sounding Seventh Star, credited to Black Sabbath with Tony Iommi, was released, the lyrics and music for which had been written by the Sab guitarist. But the incarnation showed little signs of maintaining the fan following or success which the band had achieved in its earlier years. Although Seventh Star made the UK top 30, it failed to dent the US top 50. It just wasn't in the same league as previous Sabbath outings such as Heaven and Hell, We Sold Our Soul for Rock and Roll, Black Sabbath Volume 4, Master of Reality and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, which by now had all been certified platinum sellers by the RIAA. In the first of another succession of personnel changes, vocalist Glenn Hughes left the band after 10 dates into a US tour, to be replaced by the late Ray Gillen, a respectable American singer who finished out the tour but failed to make any released recordings with Sabbath. Now working around the nucleus of Tony Iommi, as the decade progressed, band members would keep shifting and changing their allegiances, with Iommi being the only member to remain in all of the various Sabbath lineups. Ever new versions of the band would feature Iommi and a changing cast of dependable metal performers. However, by the late 1980s, Sabbath-inspired bands like Iron Maiden had taken Black Sabbath's basic crunching style to newfound commercial and visual heights, and it seemed unlikely that the Sabs could ever again be a major force in the world of heavy metal. The band also became PR pariahs when the anti-apartheid campaign announced it planned to picket Black Sabbath concerts after the group played a series of dates in Sun City, South Africa in the summer of 1987. In November 1987, Black Sabbath released their 14th album, The Eternal Idol, that featured ex-Alliance Forcefield vocalist Tony Martin. Of course, Iommi was on guitar, with bassists Dave Spitz and Bob Daisley, and Bev Bevan and Eric Singer were on drums. 1986's stand-in touring vocalist Ray Gillen actually recorded this album, but had left Sabbath before it was released. He later went on to form his own band, Badlands, which ironically featured guitarist Jake E. Lee from Ozzy Osbourne's group. Tony Martin came in at that point and re-recorded the vocals. Although the music on offer sounded more like Sabbath than its predecessor, with tracks such as The Shining, Hard Life to Love, and Lost Forever making their respective marks, the lack of any consistent band lineup put the band's credibility into question by their devoted fans. The Eternal Idol, their last album for the Vertigo label, failed to make it into any major chart position in either the UK or the US.
Because all we play to is basic rock and roll as kids, guys that are sort of into like just having a good old rock, instead of thinking, oh, they're using a oscillated synthesizing backward flip carving or whatever. They don't care. All they want, if it sounds good when they put it on the turnstile, it sounds good, and that's about it, you know.
Surviving band member Tony Iommi was dealt a blow in 1988 when former Sabbath bassist Geezer Butler teamed up with the phenomenally successful Ozzy Osbourne for an album and a tour. Although all would be forgiven when the legendary bassist returned to the Sabbath fold some 3 years later. But then, against all odds, a contract with Miles Copeland's IRS label saw the tide finally turn for Iommi. A return to classic Sabbath values of hard work was called for. In April 1989, Black Sabbath released their 15th album, Headless Cross. It was produced by and featuring renowned veteran English rock drummer Cozy Powell, who'd served stints with Rainbow, MSG, Whitesnake and ELP, amongst others. He joined Iommi, vocalist Tony Martin and Lawrence Cottle on bass. Headless Cross broke the Sabbath jinx by putting the band back in the UK top 40. Tony Martin's impassioned vocals and Cozy Powell's solid skin thrashing enlivened some of the band's best work, and Iommi's unpretentious riff invention seemed limitless on such classic cuts as Devil and Daughter, When Death Calls, and Black Moon. The title track, an improbably simple stunner, was an underrated single release for the band since it only peaked at number 62 in the UK. However, over in America, there was much work to be done to repair the band's commercial standing when Headless Cross failed to enter the Billboard Hot 100. Another big name was needed to stabilise what now seemed to be a more formalised Black Sabbath lineup. Ex-Whitesnake Vow Wow bassist Neil Murray was enlisted to replace Lawrence Cottle as the group began a 16-date US tour. In September 1990, some 22 years after the inception of Black Sabbath, the band released their 16th album, TYR, again on the IRS label. Featuring the continuing direction set by their 1987 album, The Eternal Idol, and 1989's Headless Cross opus, TYR was a conceptual affair dealing with Norse myths. Black Sabbath were once again gaining momentum with some essential slabs of metallic rock in the shape of Anno Mundi, Jerusalem, The Sabbath Stones, and the ballad Feels Good to Me. TYR was a UK top 30 hit for the band. The Sabs seemed to be back on track, and the Tony Iommi, Tony Martin, Cozy Powell, Neil Murray lineup was proving to be a musical force to be reckoned with. However, eventually flagging record sales and declining credibility called the shots. Old personal scruples were put aside when, in September 1991, the classic early 80s lineup of Black Sabbath was reinstated in all its glory to put the band firmly back on the metal map. Guitarist Tony Iommi re-recruited vocalist Ronnie James Dio, bassist Geezer Butler, and even attempted to persuade original drummer Bill Ward to rejoin the ranks. When Ward declined, Cozy Powell was offered the Sabbath drum stool, but was put out of action when he got crushed by his horse. So Dio's band sidekick, Vinny Appice, rejoined the band. The summer of 1992 saw Black Sabbath back in its prime with the release of the Dehumanizer album, featuring Dio's trademark gutsy larynx. Like its illustrious predecessors, Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules, it rocked the rafters and shot up the charts, going UK top 30 and US top 50. Dehumanizer featured smashingly heavy Sabbath material in the shape of tracks such as TV Crimes, which was a top 40 hit for the band in the UK, Master of Insanity and Sins of the Father. The track Time Machine was featured in the box office smash hit Wayne's World, and the album certainly put the status of Black Sabbath back where it belonged. In the fall of 1992, the band performed at London's Hammersmith Odeon during the UK leg of its Sellout World Tour, and appeared at New York's Beacon Theatre during North American dates. But all hell broke loose in the Sabbath camp that November when they were invited to perform at the final two shows of Ozzy Osbourne's No More Tours trek at the Pacific Amphitheatre, Costa Mesa, Los Angeles. Dio had heard of Osbourne's plans to reform the original Black Sabbath lineup for a one-off performance on the last night of his farewell solo tour. He refused to take the stage for their support set and immediately quit the band for the second time. Black Sabbath were forced to enlist the vocal help of metal god Rob Halford from Judas Priest to stand in for the errant singer. The last night of the tour thus ended with an almost original Black Sabbath reunion. A 30-minute set featured Ozzy Osbourne, Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler and Vinnie Appice. Shortly thereafter, it was announced that Black Sabbath intended to reform with Osbourne after the band was inducted into the Rock Walk Hall of Fame.
I mean, I attract an audience that I love dearly, and I'm so proud to have these kids. I've got all the time in the world for these kids, you know what I mean? I really have.
Throughout 1993, word had it that Osbourne, Iommi, Butler and original drummer Bill Ward would tour together again. But Osbourne's attempts to reform the original group for a full-scale reunion tour faltered when the others demanded equal pay shares of the spoils. By the year's end, Osbourne had backed out, leaving the remaining members to pick up the pieces once again. The indefatigable Tony Iommi went right back to work with Butler, rehiring vocalist Tony Martin and adding former Rainbow drummer Rob Rondinelli to the Sabbath fold. In February 1994, still signed to IRS Records, this particular lineup of Black Sabbath released the band's 18th album, Cross Purposes, which made the UK number 41 in its week of entry. The band confidently put the Sabbath stamp on a range of metal sounds, from the ethereal to the bluesy, on such tracks as Eyewitness, Cross of Thorns, The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Immaculate Deception and Psychophobia. Cross Purposes may not have set the US charts alight, peaking as it did at number 122, but the group managed to play a sellout gig at the Eagles Ballroom in Milwaukee, Wisconsin during its US tour with the heavy metal stalwarts Motorhead and Morbid Angel. In Japan, however, Sabbath was still regarded as a supergroup of sorts, which saw them easily fill venues like the Festival Hall in Osaka during their Southeast Asia dates. October 1994 saw the release of a Black Sabbath tribute album entitled Nativity in Black, a tribute to Black Sabbath. It featured appearances from original members of the band in various guises. Ozzy Osbourne duetted with Northern Irish rockers Therapy on Iron Man, while Geezer Butler and Bill Ward, along with ex-Judas Priest main man Rob Halford, billed as the Bullring Brummies, served up a stirring version of The Wizard. Elsewhere, there was a varied collection of classic Sabbath songs from the likes of Megadeth, White Zombie, Sepultura, Biohazard, Ugly Kid Joe, Bruce Dickinson, Corrosion of Conformity and Type O Negative. Thanks to a little help from their modern metal siblings, Black Sabbath were once again established as a dependable and valued feature, appreciated by many as the band that set the heavy metal agenda. This fact was further reinstated when the RIAA certified 4 million sales of the band's landmark Paranoid album. While there was little chance that Black Sabbath could ever recapture their former glories, there was still real fire in the majority of their recorded work for the IRS label. Spurred on by new interest in the group, the Headless Cross lineup of guitarist Tony Iommi, vocalist Tony Martin, drummer Cozy Powell and bassist Neil Murray was reunited. The resulting album, the sparky Forbidden, released in June 1995, featured some surprises. It was recorded in Wales and Los Angeles under the production guidance of Body Count guitarist Ernie C, and featured an unlikely guest spot by rap vocalist Ice-T on the track Illusion of Power. Although it didn't make that much headway in the UK album charts, key cuts such as Get a Grip, Shaking Off the Chains and Sick and Tired proved that this particular incarnation of the band was creatively tried and tested. Major US and British tours followed, though Skinsman Cozy Powell left the band for personal reasons after the US leg of the trek and headed home to England. Drummer Bobby Rondinelli, who had played with the group in 1994, rejoined the band for the European and Asian legs of the tour, which included a date at London's Shepherd's Bush Empire during a 6-date UK jaunt in November 1995. Despite newfound critical acclaim, no matter how hard they tried, Black Sabbath simply couldn't replicate the odd, anxiety-ridden befuddlement that was Osbourne's and Sabbath's signature. With the exception of Dio's first efforts with the group, most latter-day offerings from the band, although a cut above their competitors, still sounded unpleasantly similar to much of the cut-rate metal that they had inspired. And, despite concerted efforts by the group to re-establish its identity internationally, the band's new LPs were selling fewer and fewer copies, as Black Sabbath went through one personnel change after another. Over the years since Osbourne's original departure in 1979, Sabbath had recruited an impressive score of musicians that had each made their own unique contributions to the band. However, while Ozzy Osbourne's solo career had proved to be a spectacular, bizarre, and extremely lucrative one, especially in the States, Sabbath had laboured through unstable lineups to recapture former glories. It was a struggle centred mainly on the vocalists trying to fill Ozzy's shoes. But by March 1997, Osbourne and Black Sabbath had edged closer to a reunion. In the summer of that year, the original Sabbath lineup, including Osbourne, regrouped for the singer's Ozzfest 97 US tour, with separate sets both by Ozzy and the original Sabbath of Osbourne, Iommi, Butler and Ward. As ever in the Sabbath camp, humour and tragedy were never far apart. When Ozzy's larynx failed him, the rest of the Sabs took the stage at one date to play their greatest hits in tandem with the support acts. Predictably enough, the fans rioted, and Spinal Tap 2 got a great plot idea. By the end of the year, however, the full reunion proper took place, with the original Sabbath lineup playing two historic sell-out live shows at the NEC Arena in their hometown of Birmingham, England, on December 4th and 5th, 1997.
It's not a reunion. It's everybody's got the wrong impression. They're just playing on my show, you know. It's not. I know that there is a possibility of a jam, but I'm not going to do a whole set with Black Sabbath.
In the spring of 1998, original Black Sabbath skinsman Bill Ward was rushed to hospital in Wales, having suffered a heart attack. Ward's health problems cast a shadow over the UK reunion. But the demand for action from the original lineup had a tempting financial angle that suggested this was nowhere near the end of Sabbath. Former drummer Vinnie Appice replaced Ward on the forthcoming tour dates. Sadly, around the same time, drummer Cozy Powell was killed in a car accident when his Saab 9000 hit a barrier on the Central Reservation on the M4 motorway between London and Bristol. On June 20th, an all-day Ozzfest, with Osbourne playing both solo and with Sabbath, took place at the National Bowl, Milton Keynes, a prestigious British gig for the band that ended up reputedly grossing £1.3 million. Success garnered by the reformation in America got the band nominated for induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, although in the end they failed to make the final cut. In October, the band released Reunion, the first official live recording of the classic Sabbath lineup. Recorded at the Reunion Birmingham dates the previous December, the double CD performance set also premiered two new studio cuts, which would have done justice to any of Black Sabbath's first four albums. Needless to say, it performed well, reaching number 41 in the UK, but more importantly, peaking at number 11 in the US album charts. During 1999, the popular Reformation tour rolled on throughout the States. Though the band was set to play final UK dates at London's Earls Court Arena under the banner The Last Supper, the shows had to be pulled at the last minute due to touring commitments. Black Sabbath finally wound up their comeback reunion dates back in Birmingham with dates at the NEC and a surprise Kerrang! Magazine-sponsored X-Fest show at London's Astoria Theatre. While the various members now get back to the basics of recording individual album projects, there is still talk of the original Sabbath lineup releasing a new long-playing studio record, their first since 1978's Never Say Die opus. In hindsight, Black Sabbath has a long and great history. the band's records, particularly those recorded with Ozzy Osbourne in the 1970s, continue to inspire as well as infuriate whole new generations of listeners. Their legacy lives on, not just with Sabbath's reunited original lineup, but in all of the bands that have been spawned from and influenced by them. Even today, over 30 years after the band's inception, Sabbath continues to pump out one incredible album after another. Over the years, lineups may have changed, but the music hasn't. It has remained the same loud, methodical, guitar-based heavy rock that it was in the early 1970s. Having established themselves as the heavy metal icon band of the 20th century, Black Sabbath are poised to continue to rock forward into the new millennium.
Thank you for buying Maximum Sabbath. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy it or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT3 6YY, and tell us so. We've got 3 copies of our next release for the best letters, so don't forget to include your name and address. You can check out our full catalogue on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk. Thanks again for listening and goodbye for now.